This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberfire.com. It is college football week here on Covering the Spread. Earlier this week, we were talking Heisman voting. Today, we're talking a little college football and future bets. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberfire.com, joined here as always by Ed Feng of thepowerrank.com. You can follow him on Twitter at thepowerrank. Ed, happy college football week. Part 2 on tap for today, talking some college football futures. I'm pumped for the season now, less than 1 month away. How you doing today?
I'm doing great this morning. Always love college football. It's kind of where I first, I guess I first started doing NFL numbers, but love the college football game and excited to talk about things with you, as always, Jim. But
Absolutely.
Jim, this is a sports betting show, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I feel like that means we should make maybe a wager on a game. Just, wager between the two of us. And your school, Northwestern, is traveling out to one of my schools, Stanford, to open up the season. Stanford is a 6.5-point favorite, a little bit of home field. My numbers actually have Northwestern ranked ahead of Stanford. Hopefully we'll get into that a little bit.
Interesting.
But, the odds are towards Stanford. I was figuring this could be like a gear type bet, like you wear a Stanford shirt if Stanford wins. I wear a Northwestern shirt. Although I might have to wear like a Northwestern shirt for a couple episodes, just given the odds of this thing.
What if you give me the points and we just make it straight up? I mean, we make it like, based on the spread.
Yeah, we could do that too.
I would take 6.5. I think that's pretty fair. I mentioned before that I am sort of scared about Northwestern this year because they did lose 3 offensive line starters. I'm excited about Hunter Johnson as a quarterback, and I think that's going to be pretty fun, but losing those 3 linemen does worry me, but 6.5 points is interesting. Last time they played was 2015, Christian McCaffrey, Kevin Hogan year at Northwestern, and that
was terrible, dude.
They kind of disrupted some things there. I think the grass was like 6 feet tall because they knew that McCaffrey would just shred them if it weren't 6 feet tall, and that may have played a factor. Justin Jackson
but that was
in that
also
game too.
I mean, I think it was like a noon kick at Central Time, which is obviously what you should do when you're inviting a Pac-12 team, to come east to open up the season. Yeah, man, that was brutal.
It was not a noon kick. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. It was actually an hour earlier. And those were always the worst ones in college because, you have to get to the stadium, and it's like a mile off campus, and you have to get there by 11 o'clock. You're tired because it's Saturday morning in November. It's cold. And it's 11 o'clock. So those were not fun, but when you're playing Stanford, a little bit extra buzz. And I think that, I was very happy with the way things worked out there. And I was very happy that McCaffrey may not have been fully awake just yet.
All right. So T-shirt on the show, ATS, 6.5 points.
Yes, I think 6.5 is a good number. I will take that. So if Northwestern loses by 6 or fewer points or wins, then Ed has to wear a Northwestern shirt. If Stanford wins by 7 or more points, I am wearing a Stanford shirt. I would kind of like to have a Stanford shirt anyway, so I'm not really opposed to this. I think this is actually this is a pretty good one, and I think it'll give me a little bit extra motivation to watch that game and have a little bit of fun with it. I think this. I like these friendly wagers. This is fun.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to get laughed at with my Northwestern shirt around Ann Arbor, but so be it. That's what making a bet's all about.
Let's not make any bets on Michigan against Northwestern because that has not gone well. They've had a lot of ugly games and a lot of bad games. So let's.
Oh man,
I'm glad it's Stanford and not Michigan. I'll say.
All right, no, that's fair enough. But I mean, Northwestern's given Michigan some fits over the years.
Yeah, and
last year. So
yeah, I just have these awful flashbacks to. I don't remember what year it was. I think it was 2014 when they went to overtime and Trevor Siemian. I think it was on a 2-point conversion attempt. He had a rollout towards the right. He tried to stop, and because it was raining, he just slid on his butt, and the game was just over. That was the end of the game. Somehow he got drafted, and somehow he's actually played in the NFL. But whenever I think of Siemian with Northwestern, that's the first thing that pops out in my mind. They've had some pretty ugly games.
Hey, it's better than a butt fumble. So
that's true. It could always be worse. Absolutely. One quick reminder once again that if you missed our podcast back on Monday with Edward Egros, he dropped a lot of really good information about betting on the Heisman, historical trends, some guides he likes for this year. You can find that podcast by searching for Covering the Spread on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find that. And while you are there, especially on Apple, make sure you leave a rating and a review because those help us out a ton. A lot of you have already done so thank you to those of you who have, but those are huge for us, especially as we gear up for college football season and the NFL season. Thank you for those who have left those already, and a future thank you to those of you who do leave them going forward. Apple Podcasts, where you can find Covering the Spread. As mentioned today, we're going through college football futures, which is why we had to get a little Northwestern versus Stanford talk in there. We're going to talk with Ed about what his numbers say at the power rank and where he finds some advantageous bets for 2019. And if you want to get in on the action, check out the FanDuel Sportsbook and place your first bet today. If you lose, FanDuel will give you a refund of up to $500 in site credit. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com for more details. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 plus and physically present in New Jersey or now Pennsylvania to place those bets. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Covering the present.
So let's dive on in now to Covering the Present, taking a look at some of the numbers Ed has over at the power rank. And Ed, I want to pick your brain a little bit first here because as someone who has never built a college football model, I'm very curious about how things work. So first of all, how long have you been doing these over at the power rank, and what's the process for building out these rankings that you have for all of the FBS teams?
Yeah, so I've been doing this since 2013. Those are the earliest rankings that I have, so that's about 6 years. And it's a pretty simple regression model. It's multilinear regression, something you probably do on Google Sheets. But it's based on this idea in college football that teams tend to persist from year to year. Alabama's always going to have winning tradition and financial resources, and Nick Saban, and Rice has none of those things. So it's very unlikely that Alabama and Rice are going to trade places in the college football pecking order. And, if you've been good over the past couple of years, that's a pretty good predictor of you're being good next season. And so the primary ingredient in the model is how the team has performed over the past 4 years. And the regression model figures out what the weighting is for those particular years. And the way I evaluate team performance is by my team rankings. And this is kind of how I got in the business originally. So it takes margin of victory in games and adjusts for strength of schedule. Obviously, strength of schedule is a huge thing in college football where there's varying conference strengths from the SEC. Playing in the SEC is much different from playing in the Sun Belt. And that's kind of where my math chops kind of come into play. Good team rankings. I have a good estimate of where a program's been over the last 4 years. That's the first thing in my model. And then the next thing is turnovers. So your team rating can be pretty good if you have a very positive turnover margin. So essentially the model says, if you were plus 30 in turnovers last year, that's unlikely to continue. Plus 30 probably means your team ranking was higher than it should have been, and so it makes an adjustment for that. And then the last factor that goes in the model is returning starters. It's just one number, and obviously if you have more returning starters, you tend to perform better on the field the next year. And over the last 5 years, it's a simple model. It could be improved on, and I do plan to do that one of these years. But it's predicted the winner straight up in over 70% of college football games over the last 5 years. And this is only FBS versus FBS games.
Right.
So the model doesn't do FCS games. So, it's not including those cupcake games in that 70% win rate.
You're not padding the stats with those FCS teams. And one of the big keys to this model, and this is available publicly on thepowerrank.com, is you can see the predicted margin of victory against an average team. Is that the main driver when you build out your win total projections? Because the win total projections are a separate thing, and you can see a win total projection for each team. Is that predicted margin of victory the main driver behind those win total projections?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can let's just take an example. Let's do that Stanford at Northwestern game.
Yeah.
I forget exactly what the rating difference was, but I think Northwestern was better by a point, let's say. So
I can actually pull it up because I have the rankings up here on the site right now. So Stanford is 4.39 and Northwestern is 5.14. So less than a point between the two teams against an average team.
So Stanford's going to have home field. We'll just assume that's 3 points out there. So Stanford's going to be favored by 2.2-ish points. So that margin of victory implies a particular win probability for Stanford, probably 55, 56%. And then to get your win totals, you assume that every game is independent of every other game, and you add up the win probabilities to get the win total. And that's what you can get in my 2019 college football win totals report.
And when you're trying to build out, look at which bets you like most, are you trying to stick to the ones that deviate the heaviest from what the actual win totals are, or are you looking for anything in particular? Are you just looking so Nebraska was one, and probably not a good example because you gave reasons why maybe your model is underrating them, but are you just looking for the extremes mostly?
Yeah. So my approach to using analytics to bet is to look for those extremes and then understand where your model is wrong and, research factors like injuries and then decide whether you want to make a bet. And that's going to happen for games, and that certainly happens for win totals as well. One thing I do want to say about win totals is that this is more true in the NFL than it is in college football. But, I'm always especially for this model, it's a regression-based model. So it's going to be better at predicting that a team is not likely to fill up the hype. Right. I mean, the whole idea is that you're going to regress to some mean. And in this model's case, you're going to regress to where your program's been over the last 4 years. So that's why the model kind of hates Texas this year. And I think that I think it's right on there. The model doesn't like Nebraska because they haven't really performed that well over the last 4 years. I'm a little bit more bullish on Nebraska as well. But I guess I'm saying this to say that, especially in win totals, especially looking for value, you kind of want to look for teams that are, like hyped teams that are kind of below where the model says they're below a very high win total. So Texas 9.5 wins, something like that. And then you're looking for regression for like those bottom feeder teams too, right? So, I mean, if you have a team that is at 2.5 wins on the win total market, the model's probably going to say something higher, and that just means that regression to me is really powerful. So I mean, bet over low win totals, bet under high win totals, and that's even more true in the NFL.
And I think that's very broadly applicable to just betting in general, is trying to spot regression and spot outliers and stuff like that. And I think also one thing you talked about that's important is kind of knowing where your model may under or overrate things. And that's something I've tried to do a lot with NASCAR is I want to know, I would say deficiencies in my model. That's the way I would phrase it for me personally. And I don't think it's a deficiency if your model doesn't fully account for something, but more so just you want to know where those differentiations may lie, essentially.
Yeah. No, I mean, you have to understand your model. And we might not have had the financial crisis in 2008 if some of those guys understood the limitations of their model.
Absolutely.
So this is just very important in general. And actually, I also want to just let me throw in, you can try to do the same thing for the NFL that I do with college football. It doesn't work. It gives you crap just because things progress so hard in the NFL from year to year that it's meaningless to look at 3 or 4 years of how an NFL team has performed and try to project this season. Right. So
the outside circumstances matter a lot less there than they do.
Yeah, well, and you just have the margins are so thin in the NFL, right? I mean, being just with the salary cap and everything, it's just it all those teams are pushed very hard towards average, and it's just hard for this kind of regression model to get any insight based on last year's data. So
let's dive in here to what your numbers say for this year, because Clemson and Alabama have basically run the world the past couple of years. They've won four consecutive championships between the two of them. They both have elite quarterbacks returning. We just talked about both those guys on Monday with Edward. And I think that obviously these are going to be the top two teams based on pretty much any model, but how far are those two teams ahead of the pack based on your numbers?
I mean, an insane amount. I mean, I haven't seen any team as high as Clemson. I think they're 27 points better than FBS average. For this particular regression model, that is an insane number. Usually the top team is 21, 22 points, and that's usually Alabama. There's always some fortuitousness that comes into a ranking that high. I mean, I think Clemson, all due respect, great respect for the program, but they played their best game against Alabama in that championship game. That's really pushing up their rating from last year. They got some turnover breaks in that game as well. So, regression to the mean says that's probably a little bit too high, but that's also what the model says. And Alabama's not too far behind them. They're a couple points below. I think, the model right now would predict Clemson by about 3 points on a neutral field. But yeah, those two teams are way ahead. And I don't think you can legitimately look at these programs with the caliber of quarterback they're bringing back and argue with that.
So right now, Clemson is plus 170 at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the championship. Alabama plus 275. Mm-hmm. Because they are so far ahead of the pack, would you be willing to bet either of them at those numbers, or do you think that those numbers are appropriate based on what your numbers say?
Yeah, I'm going to have to take a pass on that right now, Jim, because I can actually crank those numbers out. I just haven't had a chance to do that.
Right.
So maybe in a couple weeks we can talk about it. One thing you should note, I mean, the odds on Clemson are a lot shorter. I mean, they play such a weaker schedule than Alabama that even if you assume that they're at the same level, you'd have to give higher odds to Clemson. And you can see that in their playoff odds too on the FanDuel Sportsbook.
Right. Interesting. So what are some teams that your model likes more than the national rankings? Because we did see the national rankings just come out this week, so we kind of have a gauge of what the public thinks and what the voters think of various teams. Are there any major deviations between your rankings and what they're saying?
Yeah, I mean, let me give you two teams that I think are interesting. One that I agree with and one that I don't. And so LSU, my model has at third. That's too high. I mean, right now you have to kind of put Georgia as the third team behind Clemson and Alabama. And I presume that's what the rankings did. I didn't get a chance to take a look at those, Jim.
I'll pull them up. But what do you think about LSU?
Yeah, LSU is we're going into the year 3 of Coach O, and they obviously had a great year last year, and you can't take anything away from them. But I really just think they have limited upside. I'm not sold on Joe Burrow as a quarterback. They were 39th in the nation when I look at adjusted yards per attempt last year. And then, what is really keeping that program together is the defensive side of the ball. Dave Aranda is, the best defensive coordinator. One of the best, if not the best defensive coordinator in the nation. He did lose 2 pretty key players on that team, but gets a lot of his starters back. I'm in this stage where I'm just kind of waiting for the Coach O to collapse a little bit. So I kind of just don't trust him as a coach. Clearly a good recruiter, clearly a charismatic guy, but he's really not a coach, and this is really not a quarterback that I think is really going to be testing Alabama in the SEC West.
So LSU is 7th in those opening rankings. Your ratings have them 3rd.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're putting them closer to their national rankings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think LSU's so this is a case where I don't believe the model.
Okay.
A case where I might believe the model a little bit more that might be surprising is Auburn. So they're 9th in the model. Their defense was 20th when I look at adjusted yards per play last year. They get most of those guys on that side of the ball back. They bring all their offensive line back. And then just got to figure out who's going to play the quarterback position, right? No big worries there. We talked about this a little bit on the show Monday, right?
Yeah.
That in terms of whoever starts playing quarterback for them might as well take a flyer on them for the Heisman. So, Auburn is a program where the cupboard is always full. There's always talent there, and they've been a roller coaster of a program because they can have bad years, but there's always the talent for them to really break through. 9th might be too high. My model actually had them at 5th last year. I didn't know whether to believe that or not. Turned out that I shouldn't have believed that. But like I said again, it's this model. When this model says a team is going to be good compared to the national rankings, I don't tend to believe that compared to when a team's going to be overrated. Okay. And the model's really good at picking teams that are going to be overrated. I've written 3 overrated college football teams, I think, for 4 years. over at SB Nation. And so that's 12 teams. I think I'm going to count myself as a loss on West Virginia last year because while they had Will Grier, I was wrong about them being overrated. I think they were 16th or 17th. But I haven't been wrong about any of those other 11.
And Texas, I think, counts as one of those teams that your model not as into as the rankings. They're 9th right now. I figured I'd throw that out there while I had those rankings up there. Let's talk here about the Big Ten, because it's a conference where there may be some ambiguity this year. Ohio State lost Dwayne Haskins. They're still favored to win the Big Ten at FanDuel Sportsbook. Obviously, still hype around the quarterback position there, but they're plus 110. Michigan plus 250. But they're also plus 280 to make the playoffs. So even though Michigan is not favored to win the Big Ten, there is still a lot of optimism around that team entering this year. Where does your model view Michigan and Ohio State relative to each other right now?
Yeah, so Ohio State is 7th and Michigan is 8th. Ohio State is better by about a point in my numbers. But that also means Michigan would be favored at the Big House right now with what we know from these programs. Looking at what those odds are on the sportsbook, I think the odds should be a lot closer than what you have right now. Let's talk about Ohio State first. I'm still a little befuddled why they chose Ryan Day to be the coach. When you're Ohio State, he's kind of an unproven guy. He's had a lot of coordinator positions. Never been a head coach anywhere. And when you're Ohio State, do you have to take a risk like that? I mean, USC took a risk like that with Clay Helton a couple years ago, and I'm shocked that didn't end last year. There's a lot of belief that Ryan Day is a better coach than that. He's obviously working with a lot coming off the Urban Meyer, taking the baton from Urban Meyer. He did land Justin Fields as a quarterback, super highly touted guy, entering his second year, was at Georgia last year. And so the one thing, Ohio State also has a lot of questions, right? They lost 4 out of 5 guys on the offensive line. And their defense was, for Ohio State standards, terrible last year. And, programs like Minnesota were running all over them. So there's a lot of questions there. I think I think they have way more questions than they've had over the last couple of years. At Michigan, I live here in Ann Arbor, so I follow this team pretty closely. Just want to get that out there. So they're definitely have my perspective on this. But I mean, the one thing I want, the defense has been good over the last couple of years. The offense is a question mark, and not necessarily a question mark, but they did hire a new coordinator in Josh Gaddis. It's supposed to be more up tempo. Harbaugh's kind of taking a back seat with the offense. But I did want to tell one story with Michigan. I actually was walking to the spring game this year talking to some friends, and I said that one of my concerns about this team was the offensive line. So 2 years ago, the offensive line was dreadful, a big part of Michigan having the worst season under Harbaugh. They came back last year, and they were definitely better. But when I was looking at some of the numbers that I have in terms of pass protection, so when I look at pass rate adjusted for strength of schedule, they weren't great. They were like middle of the Big Ten, nothing elite. And so that's why I kind of said that, it was a concern of mine. But they do bring 4 or 5 starters back. And then I found out that like all 4 of those starters made an all Big Ten team. So that's a piece of information. I tell this story just because none of us are perfect, and I'm certainly not. And I'm a piece of information like that is really valuable because the people who vote for that thing watch the offensive line more than I do. And even though I saw every single game, a piece of information that makes me a lot more confident that Michigan's offensive line is going to be good this year than I originally thought. And we're all in this information business where we're just trying to make the best decisions on what information we can get. And that was an important one for me. So that being said, I think it's going to be very tight between Ohio State and Michigan. I believe what my numbers are saying there. And we'll see how their season progresses.
So very tight between those two teams, especially given the ambiguity around Ohio State. But the betting odds, not as tight, which I think shows you that Ohio State probably not a team that we want to bank on, given how enthused the sports books still are about them coming into this year, given the ambiguity around that team. Let's talk about the Pac-12 here, and that seems pretty wide open. Utah and Washington co-favorites at plus 250, but there are 5 teams in total in this conference that are 8-1 or shorter. So do you have a favorite to emerge from the Pac-12 for this year, Ed, and from a betting perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple comments on the odds here. I'm a little surprised that Oregon isn't one of the top odds. I think they're going to be the highest Pac-12 team in the human polls. They have Justin Herbert coming back, who might be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. My model doesn't necessarily agree with that, given their performance over the last 4 years, but that I thought was super interesting. And then, all due respect to Utah and Washington, you don't really want to forget about Washington State. Mike Leach is kind of hitting his stride there at that program. They were the North champs last year. And so I don't think we should forget about Washington State at 8-1 there. They're going to bring another quarterback in, grad transfer, to run the show there. A lot of their skill players are back. They have some issues with losses on the defensive side of the ball. But then again, I'm not really sure that any program in the Pac-12 has a really good defense. So Washington State at 8-1 is a very interesting odds out there.
And I think that what's fun about them is that they run their offense optimally. Like, I think that just watching them play is someone who likes analytics. They're very aesthetically pleasing. They make me quite happy. And right. I think that does matter from a betting perspective too, to have a team that runs things in an optimal manner. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And it certainly, for sure. It certainly affects who I like to bet on and who I like to root for.
So Washington State 8-1 right now, standing out in the Pac-12. Let's move here to the Big 12. Oklahoma minus 125 to win the Big 12, even though Kyler Murray's not there. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is no slouch, but definitely a change at quarterback. You've already mentioned that you don't like Texas, and they're second in odds at plus 250. So given the lack of enthusiasm around Texas that your model has and the fact that they are second behind Oklahoma, are you betting Oklahoma at minus 125, staying away from this conference? What's your read on the Big 12 right now?
Yeah, I think I'm staying away from those top 2 teams. There's a lot of issues with Oklahoma. I talked Monday about how much I like Jalen Hurts. The pass offense at Alabama was really good the last year that he was a full-time starter there. I think that was 2017. I think he's talented as both a runner and a thrower. I think he's very underrated as a thrower. But Oklahoma's defense was terrible last year. Oklahoma lost a lot on the offensive line. Again, something that I mentioned Monday. And you have to ask, how easy did that offensive line make life for Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray the last 2 years? I think it made it very easy. So we'll see how they adjust to that. What are they going to do on the defensive side of the ball? I mean, they were not good on that side of the ball. They bring in Alex Grinch, who was at Ohio State, did not have a fantastic year at Ohio State. But I think it was 2017, he was at Washington State, and they had the 16th ranked defense by my adjusted yards per play. And that's a minor biblical miracle at Washington State. So we'll see if he can replicate that at Oklahoma. But a lot of concerns there. I think I've already gone on my diatribe about Texas. I think, it's Texas is a big brand name program.
Yeah.
There is probably some reasonable hype surrounding the quarterback, Sam Ehlinger. I'm not an Ehlinger fan. I think he's got limited upside in that he really couldn't beat out Shane Buechele for the job 2 years ago. He was good last year, but didn't really shock the world. And they just got gutted on defense. Just a ton of production gone on that side of the ball. So, again, a team I'm not high on.
So let's talk here about Jalen Hurts, actually, because I think it's interesting that you bring him up, because you go back to the last year he was a starter was 2017. And, from a film perspective, maybe he wasn't that great as a quarterback, but he did do well with good assets around him. He had a 9.3 adjusted yards per attempt, which is very much a good number. 17 touchdowns, 1 pick. Obviously wasn't asked to do a ton, but he's going to have, a lot of productive players around him again. And I think that seeing him do well in a situation where he has talent around him makes me feel better about him in a situation where he'll have talent again. CeeDee Lamb is among the most talented receivers in the league. They did lose Marquise Brown, but CeeDee Lamb is still there. Grant Calcaterra is a bigger dude who can definitely help out as well. So yes, Hurts's numbers were probably inflated by talent around him, specifically Calvin Ridley, but he's going to have talent around him this year too, and I think that people maybe are holding that too much against him, even though his actual quote-unquote situation should still be positive for next year as well. And I think that's one thing worth noting, Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, again, the only thing I'm concerned about is the offensive line there.
Yeah,
because I mean they were able to blow some holes open last year with the run game as well.
Yeah, Drew Samia is a bad dude, and so is Cody Foster, and losing those guys will not help. But and I think that as someone who values offensive line, I think it is a valid concern because those are very talented players. But with Jalen Hurts, he can be a good quarterback. Any other teams that you think could provide some value this year based on what your rankings say right now at the power rank?
Yeah, I mean, no other teams that I want to highlight right now. I just want to bring out the point that this is a regression model. So it's going to be way better at picking off overrated teams in things like the human polls. And it's going to be good at picking up teams that might not be as terrible as you think. So that really is the key for looking at those set of numbers. And then also, Jim, I do want to mention, I'll be having another set of college football numbers. Okay. In the NFL, I take win totals and I back out a rating for all 32 NFL teams. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, I'll be doing that for college football as well. Provides an alternative perspective. It'll be a set of rankings that Texas fans won't throw out immediately. It'll be a set of rankings that Nebraska fans are much more. It'll be much more to their liking as well. So, and what I do at the power rank is I consider both of them in predicting, especially point spreads for week 1.
And more information is not a bad thing. And I know that you do for your college basketball rankings, you do factor in what voters say, because voters tend to have a good grasp of talent. So I think that's interesting to note. Looking forward to hearing that. Ed, thanks for giving us a little dive into what the power rank says. I appreciate the knowledge.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always fun to talk college football or anything with you, Jim, really.
Covering the future.
Let's finish things up here with covering the future. We take a look at some future bets that we like based on what our numbers are saying. And we're going to stick with college football here because, after all, it is college football week on Covering the Spread. Ed, one of the teams we intentionally did not discuss during that Covering the Present section was Iowa State. And this is a team that Edward Egros pointed out is a team that he likes for this year. Did lose David Montgomery and Hakeem Butler, but they've got a lot of talent returning. What do your numbers say about Iowa State for 2019?
Yeah, Iowa State's a team that my numbers really like. When you look at my team rankings, they're 14th. They are a step ahead of anyone else in the Big 12. I mean, they're behind Oklahoma, but they're a step ahead of anyone else. And I think I saw 8-1 today at the FanDuel Sportsbook. I had it written down.
They're
but I can't
8-1 now. Yep.
Yeah, those are some pretty good odds for what the numbers think are probably the second best team. When you look at last year, when you look at adjusted yards per play, and you look at teams. Rank them as teams in the Big 12, they were ahead of a team like Texas even last year, even though the record didn't indicate that. And then when you consider what those yards per play numbers included, not all of those offensive numbers were with Brock Purdy. So when he came in the last part of the year, the numbers got even better for them. So I think there's a lot of value in Iowa State in the conference futures right there. I'll have some more precise numbers in the next coming weeks, but right now looking at it like 8-1, you have to like what Matt Campbell's doing, both sides of the ball there, and I think the future is bright for that program.
And Matt Campbell got NFL buzz at the end of last year and decided to come back, which I think is always a positive for a team. Looking forward for them. And the thing that I like about Iowa State is, you mentioned Brock Purdy. I think that's the number one thing for me, as someone who, I think that if I were to grade myself in terms of evaluation, I feel most comfortable in evaluating quarterback play, and having a quarterback who was so young last year coming back and being the full-time starter again, I feel very good about Iowa State there, but also defensively, like they were really good, and being a strong defensive team in that conference when you have a quality quarterback, I think gives your team a lot of positive upside. They were ranked 28th in defensive S&P Plus over at Football Outsiders. They were 25th against the pass, and that's a very valuable asset to have when you're going up against the offenses that are in the Big 12. And a lot of other teams in the Big 12 lost quality players. We saw West Virginia, they lost Will Greer. We saw Oklahoma lose Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown. And that leaves open the door for a team like Iowa State to make a big jump. So, you know, when Edward mentioned it on Monday that he was into Iowa State, I immediately perked up because they're a team that I liked a lot last year, a lot of what they did, and they've shown in the past they're not afraid of Oklahoma. They will go toe-to-toe with that team, and I think that makes me intrigued by Iowa State too at 8-1. I think that you're totally on the right page there.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. There's a lot of talent coming back on that defensive side of the ball too. So with that, and you got the quarterback position taken care of, that's definitely something to look into. And I'll be interested to see how those odds change as we get towards late August.
I would not be surprised if they change. Once we see what Brock Purdy can do without Hakeem Butler, I think that they could move quickly. So I think if you want to get in on Iowa State, now is probably an advantageous time to do so. My covering the future for this week, we're talking a little NASCAR because I want to try to talk about road courses because road courses, in my eyes, are the best places to bet NASCAR. So I'm not going to talk NASCAR all that much, but I think that if you're going to bet NASCAR, do it at a road course because odds are going to be softer than they should be on guys. And the reason that they tend to be softer than they should be at road courses specifically is that odds makers do value I think that they overvalue, I'd say, what drivers have done at road courses in the past. And I think that that's advantageous for this week for two drivers specifically, in Kyle Larson and Eric Jones. And odds are not out as of right now because we're recording this a bit earlier in the week, but I think that they're two guys to monitor. I'll give my thoughts on where their odds should be. And if it comes out that their odds are longer than that, you should bet those guys. Because, again, they tend to overvalue performance on road courses, and neither Larson nor Jones will pop there. Because if you look at numbers on road courses since the start of 2017, those two guys have combined to just have one top 5 at road courses in that time, and that is the time that Jones has been in the Cup Series. But both have very good current form. And current form matters even at road courses, because last year Chase Elliott had never finished better than 4th at a road course entering Watkins Glen, but he had led a bunch of laps the previous 2 weeks, had a 4th place average running position in both New Hampshire and Pocono, and then he went out and won Watkins Glen. I think that Larson and Jones are the two guys who fit that mold for this week. Larson, based on my model, should be the 5th overall driver entering this weekend. My model does combine both track history and current form. He has top 5s in the 3 top 5s in the past 5 races. He had a 10th place average running position in Watkins Glen last year. He finished 10th in Sonoma this year, and now he's 37 points ahead of the cut line for the playoffs, which means he doesn't have to worry as much about stage points. He's not worrying as much about trying to make the playoffs. He can kind of gun for that win better than he could over the past couple of races. Larson tends to qualify well at road courses. He has qualified 6th or better in 4 straight races at Watkins Glen. He's won the pole 3 straight years in Sonoma, and he's likely to qualify well, which can often lead to good finishes because that clean air is a big positive to have. So I'm guessing that Larson's odds at close will be better than they are at open. So I try to get on Larson before qualifying on, I believe it's on Saturday. Eric Jones ranks 7th in my model straight up, but I think that my model, we were talking about understanding the limitations of your model. I think my model will underrate Eric Jones because he's a bit volatile. And volatility is not bad if you can hit the high end of that volatility, and Jones has done so. He has 4 top 10s in 6 career races at road courses. He was 10th and 5th in his 2 races at Watkins Glen, and that's paired with elite current form. He has finished in the top 3 in 3 straight races. He has had a 7th place average running position in both of the past 2, and the Jones team was a team previously that should have been prioritizing stage points, but they weren't. And I think that says to me that now that they're in a better position for the playoffs, they're not going to care about that. They're going to gun for that win. It makes me like Jones even more. I think that right now, if you look at where they are in my model, Larson should be around 12-1 to win. Jones should be around 15-1, and I don't think they'll be anywhere near that short. If you look at them last week, Larson opened at 20-1. Jones opened at 25, and I've got them at much shorter than those odds right now. And that was at a track that was not a road course, where, again, I think that they're going to be underrated because they have not popped at road courses in the past. So I think if they wind up being super short, obviously disregard this, but based on based on odds trends and based on the way that sports books tend to operate when it comes to road courses, I don't think that'll happen. So I would check out Kyle Larson, check out Eric Jones, see where their odds are, and if they're 20-1 or longer, I think that's where you start to buy into these guys and buy into elite current form. Watkins Glen, one of my favorite places to watch a NASCAR race as well. So looking forward to this weekend. Make sure you check out FanDuel Sportsbook once those odds go up. Ed, that's all we got for this week. So anything popping over at the Power Rank we need to know before next Monday?
Yeah, absolutely. I had my favorite guest ever on the Football Analytics Show. His name is Jim Sonis. We talked about NFL offensive lines, gave a lot of insight on many different teams, and a pretty awesome quarterback prediction that I'm excited to see how that turns out for this year. So,
and if you
Football
follow me on
Analytics
Twitter,
Show,
you can probably figure out who that quarterback is. I'll say that.
But yeah, I had Jim on the podcast. It was so much fun, and you guys should all go check that out, get his backstory. And a little bit about the future of what we expect to do on the show as well.
And where can people find your podcast?
I think pretty much everywhere podcasts are available. I mean, you can always go to thepowerrank.com. They're posted there, Apple Podcasts. I know it's available on Spotify, and I'm pretty sure I know it's available on Stitcher.
I listen on Spotify, so I can confirm that it is there. I want to thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun. You can follow Ed on Twitter at The Power Rank. I am at Jim Sonis, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Quick reminder, once again, to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts. It's a huge help to us over there. And when you do subscribe, it'll also get you those podcasts right as they're posted, which is a huge help, especially with things that may be more timely, as with the NASCAR odds for this weekend at Watkins Glen. So heavily recommend that you subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's all we got for this week. College football week was a lot of fun. We'll be talking plenty more college football as August rolls along, though. Thank you to Ed for joining me. Thanks for Cal for producing, covering the spread as well. We'll talk to you again next week. This has been Covering the Spread here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.